This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's access media station, Plains FM, and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
It's time for Emergence News on Plains FM 96.9, Citizen-Made Radio.
Hello and welcome to Emergence News, and I'd like to thank Plains FM for supporting us and making this possible. Emergence News, what an odd name for a program, and I'm going to give you some background information and kick us off. Okay, all the great religions posit the idea of further revelation to be given by a future teacher. Bit obvious, really. Christians hope for the return of the Christ, Buddhists look for a Maitreya Buddha, while Muslims await the Imam Mahdi. Hindus a reincarnation of Krishna, and Judaism the Messiah. Esotericists know all of these different names for the same great being, the Lord Maitreya, the World Teacher, the head of our planet's spiritual hierarchy, and look for his imminent return now. Some key phrases in there which we have discussed on previous programs, so I'm just going to plough on. Okay, so back in July 1977, Maitreya emerged from his centre in the Himalayas, like a thief in the night. Since then, he has lived in London as a seemingly ordinary man concerned with modern problems: political, economic, social, spiritual and environmental. Since March 1978, he's been known as a spokesman in the Pakistani Indian community. He's not a religious leader, but an educator in the broader sense, pointing the way out of the present world crisis. And I'd like to say crises in plural there because there's many and varied. Okay, according to esoteric teaching, Maitreya manifested himself 2,000 years ago in Palestine by overshadowing his disciple Jesus, now the Master Jesus. This time Maitreya has come himself. But he does not come alone. He is the senior member of a group known in the East as the Masters of Wisdom. As humanity's elder brothers, these enlightened beings have inspired all the great human achievements, age after age, working mainly from behind the scenes. Today, for the first time in 98,000 years, the Masters are emerging to live openly among us and will offer their guidance in the rebuilding of our world.
That's quite momentous, isn't it, that the Masters are arriving. Maitreya isn't overshadowing anyone this time.
Coming on his own, coming as himself.
So it's a pretty incredible time we're entering.
The other thing that's a little boggling there is 98,000 years. Are you kidding? But as Benjamin Creme has reported, who's very knowledgeable around this topic and has been teaching globally, we've been on the planet for 18.5 million years. Not 2,000, not 5,000, 18.5 million. Anyway, 98,000 years, they're coming back. Well, they're re-emerging, I guess you could say. Openly, yeah, thank you, Nigel. Maitreya comes to teach humanity the art of self-realisation. The first steps are honesty of mind, sincerity of spirit and detachment, and we have gone in and around that topic many, many times. Let me just finish off with Maitreya's social concerns, and they are listed in his list of priorities: an adequate supply of the right food, keyword right food, adequate housing and shelter for all, healthcare and education as universal rights. Maitreya will advocate that the number one priority, after ending the starvation for millions, will be the saving of the environment. Maitreya's message can be summarised in a few words: share and save the world. Now, just to finish off, the information about Maitreya's emergence was presented to the public from 1974 through to 2016 by Scottish artist and author Benjamin Creme. Was the chief editor of Share International. His training for this work under a Master of Wisdom began way back in 1959. Mr. Creme lectured throughout the world on this subject, author of more than a dozen books, and accepted no payment, no royalties for this work. So he is probably our main source of information, Nigel. Would that be fair?
Absolutely, Benjamin Creme. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you, Peter? We refer to him all the time.
Yes, indeed. Of course, we go back to Blavatsky as well, and Alice Bailey.
True.
Bring through the teachings as well.
I think that's a nice lineage, Peter. Just let me say that in the studio I've got got Peter and Nigel with me. Thank you, lads, for being here.
Great to be here.
Peter, we talk about that lineage, Blavatsky, Alice A. Bailey and Benjamin Creme, as people immersed in the esoteric view of the world, and Benjamin Creme as the oracle for the emergence of Maitreya the World Teacher. So we're going to take a little break and I'll come back and see what the boys have got for us. All right, so welcome back, listeners, and Nigel and Peter, welcome back also. Nigel, give us a quick intro of what you got for us today, please.
Well, I was interested in your intro that you talked about Maitreya's principles, and you mentioned food, adequate, right food.
Key word. I'm
not going to be popular on the program today. I'll give you a
We're
warning.
not here to be popular, buddy.
Well, I'm not going to be popular because we're looking at Share International magazine articles.
Yep.
And I've found an article in the October 2020 issue, so it's about 18 months old. It's entitled "The New Normal, There Is No Going Back." And I'll just read you one sentence out of this article.
Is this a teaser, Nigel? You're giving us a teaser.
Exactly, you're on top. Yeah, just a snippet.
Yeah, a snippet.
Cutting out all animal food produce is the single most significant step individuals can take to help reduce their impact on the environment. That's unbelievable, isn't it?
That is a powerful statement.
It is. And so we're not worrying about so much recycling, buying electric cars or friendly light bulbs.
Organic cotton buds.
Buying New Zealand made, avoiding air travel, avoiding plastic products. All these things are important, but this article singles out one single factor that can help humanity make an enormous difference to our natural environment. And the article is entitled "No Going Back, It's All Got to Change." It was written by Graham Peebles, and he talks about a lot that we spoke about in the last two episodes when we were talking about individual karma, but he's also looking at civilization karma. We are now having to reap the rewards of our collective karma, and particularly our attitude towards greed, selfishness,
and the planet. Nigel, are you saying that we are reaping what we have sown?
Correct.
Get out of the studio. What a horrible thing to say. The other thing about a plant-based diet? The research around the benefits of it is becoming rock solid. So if you want to be healthy, plant-based diet. Peter, what have you got for us?
Yes, looking at the latest Share International, actually, John, the May issue, and there's an article there by Graham Maxton. Well, he's interviewed by Felicity Elliott from Share International.
Yep.
And it's called "A New Beginning Out of the Old Order." And it's more or less talking about his latest book actually is called "A Chicken Can't Lay a Duck Egg."
All right, listen, Peter, I'm looking forward to coming back to you and Nigel, and we'll be back with you in a minute. All right, welcome back, listeners. And I think, Nigel, shall I kick off with what I've got, or do you want to? Okay, this is what I've got, Nigel, and I've been beating myself up lately, so just bear with me a little bit. I've also gone to a Share International magazine, and honestly, listeners, that is an amazing, amazing publication. Share International magazine, you can pick it up online. So I wanted to tidy up some of the other stuff that we've discussed over the last couple of programs. So we've talked about karma and the way it affects us and some of the things we can do to manage or mitigate or even avoid collecting karma. Ha ha ha, he said jokingly. We've talked about harmlessness, and I've confessed here on air just how difficult I find that. Just how hard is it to be harmless? Therefore, from the time I wake up in the morning to the time I go to bed, I've probably done myself no favours karmically, none whatsoever. I'm a seething mess of anger and frustration and inappropriate humour, just looking for somewhere to land. The only thing I've developed is a nice smile and a sugary, friendly outer skin. But don't scratch too deep. Sometimes I just want to rend and tear and yell at the world. I'm seething, but not all the time. Thank God. And I do thank God. So having identified my shortcomings, I'm looking for answers and feeling a little sorry for himself, but not for anyone else who I may have damaged during the day.
Along the way.
Along the way. So we start again. We have discussed that harmlessness and your ability to be that are tied to your ability to practice honesty, sincerity and detachment, which we've covered on the program many times and which my intro has also just ticked off.
And helps you move towards being harmless.
Nigel, This is the personal teaching that Maitreya, the World Teacher, gives us as a starting point to self-awareness, which leads to self-realization, which is the goal of this, our human experience. It is enlightenment with a big E. Your ability to begin that journey starts with some honesty, personal, clear, and uncomfortable. The kind of, did I really do that? Is that who I really am? Kind of scrutiny, that sort of honesty. Your ability to be honest with yourself is a measure of where you are on the evolutionary path. Also possibly to do with your energetic structure. And certainly to even start this process, you need a small degree of detachment to scrutinise yourself honestly enough. So it's a bit like you have to have some to get some kind of thing.
But yet again, John, you're talking about something that is not easy to do. It's actually really difficult, to look in the mirror and self-examine yourself and ask yourself the really tough questions.
That's it. And
it's not easy.
No. And I'm going through a process at the moment where I'm not liking myself too much. Anyway, Benjamin Creme, back in 1990, he's asked a question about self-realisation. So he comes back with, Maitreya said that the first stage is knowing who you are and accepting who you are. You have to be who you are without imitating anyone. Everybody imitates everybody else. Everybody imitates people they admire, people who they think are great, movie stars, pop stars, or someone better looking or richer, or whatever it is, anything they admire, and then they imitate these external images. So they lose their ability to identify with their individuality. They lose their sparkle. You cannot process or progress if you lose that sparkle of individuality. Maitreya says that in the first place, you have to have self-esteem. Crime and violence, drug taking and so on are always from the loss of self-esteem. So Benjamin Creme continues, self-esteem has to be restored to overcome drug addiction and violence and crime in our cities. Then that self-esteem gradually becomes self-awareness. Self-awareness gradually becomes self-realization. Benjamin Creme also tells us meditation is a path to that self-realization. But quite apart from formal meditation, it is a question of who you really are. He goes on to say, practicing honesty of mind, people think one thing, say something else, and do something else again. That is dishonesty of mind, right? It's that alignment between what you think, what you say, and what you do. Benjamin Creme tells us honesty of mind is saying what you really think and being who you really are, and not pretending to be what you are not. You have to be who you are. That means recognizing who you are, identifying the real aspect of yourself, not with the body. If you identify with the body, you'll express all the ills of the body, and it leads nowhere. If you identify with your emotions, it leads you into total chaos. This is not you. You're identifying with the structures and constructions of the mind. And he gives a couple of examples. I'm a Christian, I'm a theologian, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. You are none of these. You are an immortal soul, and that is the only thing you can realize. And when you do realize it, you have salvation. Nothing else is salvation. That is self-realization.
And Krishnamurti's written books on this subject, hasn't he?
Absolutely. And one of his start points, which I think is the honesty thing, is I will observe without condemnation. Benjamin Creme finishes with, and he's always got a sense of humour. Now, if I were a Maitreya, I'd probably tell you how to achieve self-realization, but I'm not Maitreya. He has said these three things, honesty of mind, sincerity of spirit, and detachment, are essential. Detach yourself from identifying with your physical body, with the energy of your emotional system, and from the constructions of your mind. You are none of these. You are the self with a big S. And knowing the self, you can come into self-realization. At that time, you become enlightened. And I have no need to tell you anything else. And that's how he finishes. And so this process, and as you mentioned, Krishnamurti talks about detachment a lot, constantly. So this process, the answer for me is just start. Just start trying to be better, trying to be harmless, trying to be honest. Make a commitment to being as good as you can be. There's a key phrase in there for me, as you can be, and I'm going to put in brackets right now.
Yeah, don't set yourself goals that you can't achieve.
Yeah, don't beat yourself up. It's a moment-to-moment kind of growth. Once you start, your pace will grow. Don't falter. We all will and we all do, but just keep going. Personal growth or evolution or whatever you want to call it is a gentle process of unfolding. You can consciously apply yourself, of course you can, but be gentle. It will come. And I want to finish with one of Maitreya's favourite quotes for me. All things, all manner of things will be well. Okay, so that's how I'm feeling at the moment, Nigel.
Yeah, you look better for it.
And as I look across the studio into your steely blue eyes, I know that I'm on the right path. Okay, Peter, I think that dovetails in with what you've got. Come on, big guy, and let us know.
Right. Well, this Graham Maxton is an author of 7 internationally acclaimed books on climate change, energy, economics, and the automotive industry. I've never actually heard of him myself, but he's being interviewed by Share International, and that's sort of good enough for me. Anyway, he was asked what was his particular topic that he wanted to talk about. He says, the topic I would most like to discuss is how our thinking is being restricted and how news media are limiting what they tell us. I have never known a time like this where it is very hard to know what is true when so much of what we are told is only half true. I have never known a time when our leaders have made so many bad decisions and where opposing ideas are trampled and ignored. The world faces huge challenges, and we need clear thought and open discussion.
Yep.
We have muddy thought and little discussion. In preparation, I've made some notes prior to receiving Graham Maxton's email, some ideas, Share International. The trend, of course, has started years ago. We can go, in fact, right back to the tobacco lobby and further about whether medical science was right about the effects of tobacco. No evidence the contrary is produced, but they sow seeds of doubt. The same holds true for pesticide and fertilizer manufacturers and lobbies paying for research which quite naturally funds in their favour. There is an acceleration in the last few years with social media, a pressure on people to adopt one way of thinking, which is the correct way of thinking. It's almost like in China, there's an incorrect way of thinking and a correct way. There's no grey area. So, yes, I suppose that's what we've got now, isn't it? Anyway, he goes on to say, they were talking about Ukraine, and he says, Russia has repeatedly said that it is unacceptable to place nuclear weapons on its doorstep. And I'm reminded of the situation when Russia sent some nuclear missiles to Cuba. It was sort of very much upsetting to the Americans, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he said this is unacceptable for the Ukraine to be anything other than neutral. The same applies to Finland, and the West has continued to push forward. This tragedy needn't have happened. It's a terrible conflict which is causing appalling suffering in millions of people. The awful fact is that we could have avoided it if we had held back a bit, even more sensible if we had pushed, but we pushed it too far. Even now, people are not looking at long-term consequences. You see the British trying to impose all sorts of sanctions on Russia without thinking through what the consequences might be for energy, food, or inflation, and what it might mean for their own people, let alone the rest of the world.
And for the millions of people that live in Russia.
Yes.
Who are not involved in this decision-making process, which was
this is right.
which is your original point.
They're completely against it, most of the people in Russia. And we've got a global leadership which is totally unsuitable for the situation.
Yes.
You know, there's been various times in 2000, in fact, and Putin indicated that he thought Russia should join NATO. And he said that Russia is actually part of European culture. And I cannot imagine my own country in isolation from Europe and what we are often called the civilized world. So it's hard for me to visualize NATO as an enemy, said Putin. Countries, he was the acting president at that time, 3 weeks before the election. So it just shows you that, there's a lot of stuff in there that could have been avoided, that the situations that have been, the situation really has been exacerbated and pushed. And, there was an original thing back in documents in 1990, and George W. Bush was involved with regarding unifying Germany. And they said there would be not 1 inch eastward towards Russia with regard to NATO. They've done everything but that.
So, Peter, what's this author's take on climate change and the fossil fuel industry? Has he made any comments there? Not
in this article, really. He's talking really more about the disinformation and can we create a new beginning out of the old order. But he's more or less saying that we need to be a bit wiser. We need to have some leaders who are clearly thinking and not just following, emotional sort of things. They need to be using the...
So we're in a time, Peter, where our global leadership is failing us, new voices are struggling to be heard, and that the old order is fighting a fairly vicious misinformation campaign and has been doing for many, many decades. I think that what we'll do now is we will take a break and then we'll come back and finish off with Nigel. Thanks, Peter. Lovely to have you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Peter. Really topical stuff. And I think the more that we discuss the information or the misinformation that we are getting in a very rational way, which I think's your point, and that we need rational leadership. And I read an interesting article from The Economist recently, Peter, which is backing up exactly the points you've made, and that was that Putin was put under unreasonable pressure, and he's reacted badly to pressure that was not really thought through. Anyway, Nigel, what have you got for us?
Yeah, well, it's all got to change, doesn't it? And of course, Putin was wanting to appear strong, and it's all gone badly wrong. Before I start on the article that I've predicted, I thought I'd just take a quote out of a message by the Master through Benjamin Creme. It's entitled "The Justice of the Law." And he says, humanity are living in a changing world and must accept it as the norm. For some, these changes will seem threatening and unwelcome, while for others, especially the young, they will be welcomed with open arms. Be assured that they are for the best. The changes are for the best, whatever your stance, for they reflect the needs of the time and inevitable and just. Mankind should realise that they themselves are creating the conditions whereby these changes impact their lives, and that's the collective karma I referred to earlier. We need to realise that we are creating the conditions whereby these changes impact our lives, and this realism bears fruit. A smoother transition into a new time will become the norm. So let's have a look at this article. It's entitled "No Going Back, It's All Got to Change" by Graham Peebles, published in October 2020. He writes, selfishness, division and pleasure firmly in the driving seat, and the planet beautiful slowly choking to death under the weight of human greed and stupidity. So I'm going to have a look at those two words, human greed, or those two items, human greed and stupidity. Human greed, is this an exaggeration? Think about the COVID pandemic. How have we behaved? The hoarding of toilet paper was seen initially as a joke when shoppers were filmed fighting over toilet paper. So how are we going to behave when food supply shortages become a day-to-day reality? Water shortages, fuel shortages, fresh air. Now you might think, well, I'm not joking when I talk about fresh air, because here in Christchurch, the very air we breathe is literally unbearable in a residential area called Bromley. Residents cannot escape the stinking mass from Christchurch's fire-damaged wastewater treatment plant in November 2021. Some residents, John, are now wearing respirators in their own home to escape the stench and dust. Over 3,300 households are struggling to live with the smelly, rancid smell since August 2020. So it's obvious we are now experiencing more weather extremes. Even journalists are refraining from the once favoured cliche, once in a 100-year event, or unprecedented. There's no point saying that anymore, is it? There's no point articulating that.
There's no precedent anymore.
There isn't, because we've got more droughts, more fires, floods, more eruptions and earthquakes, and the ice is melting on the poles. Scientists have been warning us for decades, and environmentalists have been warning us for decades. So is Peebles exaggerating when he describes us as selfish, greedy and stupid? He says during widespread lockdowns in many countries from Europe to New Zealand, we were forced to change our habitual shopping urges, change our work and business patterns. And for a short period of time, we started to employ those notions, and we saw the results. Less noise pollution, less air pollution. Rivers became cleaner. But interestingly, greenhouse gas emissions have been barely affected. 2020 continued to be the hottest year on record. Peebles writes, the principal cause of the environmental catastrophe is consumerism. The insatiable human consumption of stuff, most of it unnecessary, and crucially, animal-based food product. Peebles says that we do not need a new normal. He insists that 99.9% of the world population and their natural environment require revolutionary change, lasting shifts in attitudes and behaviour. English author Philip Pullman says it's all got to change. If we come out of the COVID pandemic with all the rickety old structures still intact, our descendants are not going to forgive us. We must burn out the old corruption and establish a better way of living together. Now, some answers are coming. There is some good news coming, John.
I'm waiting, Peter. How are you feeling, mate?
Yeah. I'm sure there's certainly a sunny side somewhere.
Rooted in endless consumption, greed and competition, such obsessive behaviour has, in addition to strengthening nationalism and division, has pushed the planet into the critical care position. Reigniting our consumer-based economy is what the politicians and corporate voices, that's all they're concerned about. They use the words green and they use the words alternative and renewable in their carefully constructed spin, but their principal goal is not about salvaging the environment. It's not about changing behaviour. It's all about generating profit.
Absolutely.
Our media, just a couple of weeks ago here in New Zealand, celebrated the reopening of the Queenstown airport to the first Qantas flight full of Aussie tourists. Now, this unfortunately is achieved by our population consuming irresponsibly and in excess. An economic system based and reliant upon limitless consumption in all its facets, including animal agriculture, is completely incompatible with the health of the planet and the well-being of the people.
We live on a finite ball of dirt, but we practice unlimited, infinite consumption. Doesn't make sense.
Fossil fuels, huge quantities of water.
Yeah.
What goes into making one steak? It's scarcely believable.
I couldn't believe the numbers involved in making a litre of milk. It was like 11,000 litres of water. It was ridiculous.
It just doesn't make any sense anymore, does it?
No.
So what is needed? What is needed is personal effort to consume only what is needed based on need, and choices determined by the impact on the natural world. So just like what we were talking about earlier with detachment, it's difficult. It's not going to be easy. This requires personal effort and worldwide education. Okay, so how do we go about that? National public education run by governments in collaboration with environmental groups. I told you I was going to be unpopular. This is needed to help people become aware of their behaviour on the environment, including animal agriculture. In other words, we need to cut out all animal food produce. It's the single most significant step individuals can take to help reduce their impact on the environment.
Wow,
End of story.
That is a very interesting snapshot, Nigel. Any more for us?
Well, if you want to reduce your impact on the environment and therefore become increasingly harmless, you're going to have to employ persistence and courage.
Okay, Nigel, look, thank you very much. I came in here today feeling bad about how awful I am to everybody, but I live a plant-based lifestyle. I eat a plant-based diet, and I'm feeling much better about myself. Peter, do you want to wrap up with something? Give us a couple of words as we leave the studio, my friend.
Yeah, well, I just, once again, we get back to sharing the world's resources. It's Maitreya's keynote, isn't it, really? And we need to be aware. We just need to increase our awareness. We need obviously, it's a time when we are developing our mental faculties, and we need to become aware of what we do.
Thank you very much, Peter. Self-awareness and then self-realisation. Thank you very much, Nigel. To our listeners, just as we wrap up, we've had 3 little dives into the Share International magazine. This is the breadth of topics that you'll find in the magazine. We can talk personal growth, we can talk personal evolution, and the magazine also provides us with some rock-solid information around economic, political and environmental issues happening worldwide. Thanks very much.
We welcome your comments, questions and feedback. Please contact us at emergencenews@gmail.com.